Alright, so today what I wanted to do is come back to the tier list that I made and fix it for some of the mistakes that I made earlier and kind of rearrange it based off of a week of messing around with stuff on Showdown and playing some games on Showdown. So first off, again, remember the Gigantamax Pokemon, they're listed twice in their normal form and their Gigantamax form, and I forgot to save this the first time that I made this, and in order to save it, it makes you put every Pokemon on the list. So again, I didn't want to throw these into the list and have duplicates of them, so I just threw them at the bottom of the list here in the D tier. These are not D tier Pokemon, I just threw them down here to get them out of the way. Okay, but the first Pokemon I want to talk about is Tangrowth. So that's the one that I obviously made the biggest mistake on. I just completely forgot that this thing got Rage Powder. It also gets Sleep Powder and it gets Regenerator, so it's basically like a poor man's Amoonguss. So it's definitely a good Pokemon. You're going to see it a lot in this tournament. So this thing definitely belongs up here in the A tier, and that's the first one that I wanted to talk about here. So Tangrowth is definitely a Pokemon that you're going to want to consider using. And regardless of whether or not you're using Tangrowth, you definitely need counters for it. So make sure that you have Pokemon that aren't going to be able to be put to sleep. So you're going to want like a grass Pokemon, you're going to want safety goggles, stuff like that to ignore the Rage Powder, ignore the Sleep Powder. And you're going to want Pokemon that can deal a ton of damage to Tangrowth. So remember that its special defense is really weak. So you might want like fire, poison, or flying Pokemon that do special attacks to take care of Tangrowth kind of fast. It's very physically bulky, and I feel like a lot of people are going to be running Okaberry on it to take a fire hit. So if you can run someone who has like poison or flying, that might be something you want to think about for dealing with Tangrowth. But yeah, that's the biggest one that I messed up originally. I just completely forgot about that. I was focused on it having solar power and just completely forgot about how good it could be in this format. Like I said, kind of being like an Amoonguss. So next I'm just going to work from the top down. So in the S tier, I think I did pretty well with the S tier. The only one who maybe isn't as good as I thought is Mimikyu. I feel like Mimikyu should maybe just be in the A tier. I talked about how it can pretty much guarantee that you set up Trick Room, but there's so many other Pokemon that set up Trick Room, and there's Tangrowth to use Rage Powder to get redirection so that another Pokemon can easily get off Trick Room. So Mimikyu really isn't as needed as I originally thought. And the problem with Mimikyu is it's pretty fast, so once you set up Trick Room, it's got a base like 95 speed or something like that. So it's a little too fast to play under Trick Room. And then on the opposite side, if you're not using it to set up Trick Room, I just don't feel like it's that great. Unless you're going to pair it with Tangrowth and use Swords Dance and then try to Dynamax it, maybe that could be good. So obviously it still has uses. That's why I still have it in the A tier. I just don't think it's quite an S tier Pokemon. I don't think it's, best of the best. So next one that I had a little bit overrated is Weavile. I don't know why I put Weavile in the A tier. I guess I was thinking Fake Out. It's pretty fast. It's a strong dark attacker. And obviously you're going to be playing against a lot of ghosts. So it would be good against someone like Dragapult. But there's just so many other counters for Dragapult. And Weavile is pretty frail. And it doesn't have that good of an ability. So I feel like A tier is a little bit high. So I'm going to drop Weavile down here into the B tier. I feel like that's better suited for Weavile. Another one up here that I think is a little bit overrated is Gothitelle. I think this thing should be in the B tier as well. So I'm dropping the Gothitelle down here as well. So similar to Mimikyu, Gothitelle is kind of fast for setting up Trick Room. It does get Fake Out, but again, there's other Pokemon that get Fake Out. And as for its ability, there's ways around its ability. So you can use moves like Volt Switch and U-Turn to get around its ability. Also, its ability doesn't work on Ghost-type Pokemon, so it really isn't as great as I originally thought. And there isn't really a great Perish Song user. There are Perish Song options, but again, I think Gothitelle is better suited in the B tier here. It's not quite as good as what I originally thought. Okay, otherwise I think the A tier is pretty good here. The rest of these Pokemon, I guess you can make arguments for some of them that they don't belong up here, but I think it's pretty accurate. I haven't seen a lot of people using Umbreon, but it's such a good support Pokemon, it's very bulky, and it's a great counter to someone like Dragapult. So I still feel like it's a really good Pokemon. Another one that some people might argue doesn't belong up here is Crocodile, but again, I feel like a Scarf Crocodile could be pretty good. So I'm just going to leave it there. So maybe some of these are fringe A tier, maybe they'd be better in the B tier, but I think this is pretty accurate. So next, looking at the B tier, I know I put these Pokemon across the top here first because they were the Pokemon that got Tailwind, and I felt like Tailwind would still be good even though there wasn't a Prankster Tailwind Pokemon. But it turns out it's really not that great. Nobody's really using Tailwind, especially because there's so many Pokemon in this tournament that can use Trick Room, and there's so many Trick Room teams out there. Tailwind just doesn't seem that great, and especially because none of these Tailwind users are really that great. So I feel like, first off, Aerodactyl, Crobat, Noivern, Sigilyph, and Mandibuzz for sure at least belong in the C tier. There is still uses for them. Mandibuzz has a pretty good ability. It's basically safety goggles, so that could come in handy, and it's also pretty bulky, so this is another one that would be kind of like an Umbreon where you could use moves like Foul Play, make it really bulky, it gets Roost so it's able to heal itself, and it has a built-in safety goggles, so I feel like it still has a use, but I don't feel like it's a B tier. These last two, you could definitely make an argument for B tier. Drifblim could be up here just because it has Unburden, so you could do the Unburden weakness policy thing with a Pokemon like Weavile and hit with a super effective attack, and now you're going to double its speed and double its special attack. So it's a Pokemon that could be good if used the right way. Corviknight I've talked about quite a bit in my other videos. It's a pretty good Pokemon, but I think B tier is a good spot for it. You might be able to argue A tier, but I think B tier is okay for it. The other Pokemon up here, these next few are also pretty good B tier Pokemon. You could definitely make an argument for some of these to be in the A tier, but I feel like, again, this is pretty accurate. I'm not going to recreate the whole thing. That being said, I think there are a couple Pokemon who do belong to be in the A tier, and one is Bisharp. Bisharp is really good because of its ability Defiant. So if any of its stats are lowered, its attack is boosted by 2 stages. That's what Defiant does. And it's probably the best Steel type Pokemon in this competition. So it definitely belongs in the A tier, I think. It's kind of frail, but if you put a Focus Sash on it and then you use it against Pokemon like Incineroar and Crocodile who get Intimidate, and then that activates their Defiant right away, and now they're +1 attack because Intimidate drops them 1, but then Defiant boosts them 2, so they're at +1. That's the kind of situation where you definitely want to be using Bisharp. So I feel like he definitely belongs in the A tier. It's a really good Pokemon. And the other one is Hydreigon. There aren't a lot of Fairy type Pokemon. It takes 4 times damage from Fairy, but there's not a lot of Fairy options. And there's some good counters to Fairies, so if you do happen to run into the 1 or 2 Fairies that are actually useful, you could use a Pokemon like Bisharp or Nagindale, who's a strong poison Pokemon, to get rid of those Fairies and then bring in Hydreigon. So this thing is really good. It's fast. It has a really strong special attack. It's good against Pokemon like Spectrier and Dragapult because they're ghost Pokemon. So it's definitely a Pokemon that's pretty strong in this format and belongs in the A tier for this tournament. Alright, next one, I feel like Lycanroc probably belongs in the C tier. So originally, like I mentioned in one of my other videos, I thought that you'd be able to use all the forms of Lycanroc because every other Pokemon that has multiple forms, you can use all of its forms. But for whatever reason, Lycanroc, you can only use the Midnight form. And I just don't think the Midnight form is that good, so I'm putting this thing down in the C tier. I feel like that's a better spot for it. The only reason I had it in the B tier is because I thought the normal form that gets Sandrush could be useful with Jigglypuff, but since you can't use that form, the Midnight form is probably in the C tier. Polteageist is one that I'm kind of unsure about. It's a weak armor Pokemon, so it's one that you could throw on a weakness policy, hit it with like a Shadow Sneak, and double its speed and double its special attack, and its special attack is pretty high to begin with. But since it's so easy to take out with like a Sucker Punch or something like that, I'm actually going to throw this thing down in the C tier, but maybe it did belong in the B tier. I haven't seen anybody use it. It's just that it's so frail and so easy to knock out, but you could definitely use that weak armor ability with a weakness policy to use this thing as a strong Dynamax option. It's just the frailness and how easy it would be to take out with like a Sucker Punch that maybe it just belongs in the C tier. So another one that maybe belongs in the C tier is Shedinja. I'm going to drop this thing down here. I talked about how I thought it would be used a lot, but then rethinking about it, there's so many counters to Shedinja that it's probably not that usable. It's great in a format where there aren't a lot of Pokemon being used that have super effective damage to Shedinja, but in this format, almost everything has super effective damage to it. So it probably belongs here in the C tier, and honestly maybe even lower, just because there's so many good counters to it. So the rest of the B tier here I think is pretty good. Again, you can make arguments for a couple of these ones at the top that maybe they're A tier. You can make an argument for a couple of these on the bottom that maybe they're C tier, but I think this is pretty solid for the most part. So a Pokemon from the C tier that definitely belongs to be up here in the B tier, in my opinion, is Omastar. This is another one just like Polteageist that has weak armor, so you can use that weakness policy, weak armor strategy. And then Magmortar gets Mach Punch, so you can hit it with Mach Punch, which is a priority fighting move, and that's going to activate the weakness policy and the weak armor. So that's going to double its speed and then double its special attack. And then Omastar has a pretty good move pool, and it's super effective to a lot of the better Pokemon since it gets rock moves, water moves, and then ice moves to deal with grass and dragon types. So like Dragapult is weak to ice because it's a dragon type. This is also something that could easily knock out a Tangrowth because its Max Hailstorm is a special attack and that's going to take out a Tangrowth. So it's got a good move pool and it can be super effective to a lot of the better Pokemon in the tournament. And I feel like that's just a strategy that could work out really well. Now, obviously Omastar has quite a few weaknesses, and with the weak armor ability, obviously you're dropping its defense, so it's going to be a little bit frail. But using that strategy definitely caught me off guard the first time I saw it. And if you let this thing get going, it can be really scary and just sweep through your whole team. Another one I feel like could be bumped up is Shiftry. This thing is actually a lot better than I originally thought. It's the best chlorophyll Pokemon in this format, so if you pair it with Sableye and use Sunny Day, now with chlorophyll you can make sure that Shiftry is outspeeding everything, and then it has some pretty good moves. If you watch my other videos, you saw that I put Scope Lens on it because it has two moves that have boosted critical hit ratio. So you're going to get quite a few critical hits with it. It can outspeed anything once the sun is up. So it's actually a pretty strong Pokemon and can be pretty good if used on the right team and in the right situation. Another one that can be really good in the right situation is Crawdaunt. Adaptability is just such a good ability because it doubles your stab moves instead of multiplying them by 1.5. So its water and dark moves just hit so hard. So I put an Assault Vest on this thing, maxed out its hit points and maxed out its attack. And then its water moves and its dark moves just do so much damage, especially if you do Dynamax it and you max Geyser and get up the rain. Now those next max Geysers are going to do even more damage. So again, in the right situation, this thing could be really good and deal out just tons of damage. One more that I feel like could be in the B tier is Mow Rotom. The only reason is that there aren't a lot of good grass Pokemon. So if you're looking for a grass Pokemon that can deal out damage, Mow Rotom is one of the better options here. So the other grass type Pokemon are Tangrowth, who you're using as just a bulky Rage Powder, Sleep Powder Pokemon. And then the other two are Delamise and Shiftry. Delamise is a good grass Pokemon under Trick Room. Shiftry, like I just said, is really good with Sunny Day up. But Mow Rotom just gives you one more option. Again, since there aren't a lot of good grass Pokemon, maybe that's one that you would want to consider. So the last one I'm going to pull up from this list is Slurpuff because it gets Unburden. So Unburden and Weak Armor work very much the same. So I would put a weakness policy on Slurpuff and then hit it with a super effective attack. And that's going to set off the weakness policy, which is going to activate Unburden. So it's going to double its speed and double its special attack without having a defense drop like Weak Armor has. So the Pokemon that you usually use with Slurpuff in this tournament is Toxicroak because Toxicroak gets Bullet Punch. So you can do Bullet Punch on your Slurpuff. That's going to activate the weakness policy, which sets off Unburden. And Slurpuff actually gets a really good move pool. So it definitely isn't one of the greatest Pokemon in the world, but with Unburden weakness policy, since you can make it the fastest Pokemon on the field and it gets such a wide variety of moves, it actually can be used pretty well as a Dynamax Pokemon. So again, another one that in the right situation could be really good. So I think that's it for the C tier list here. Again, I know there's always arguments that could be made for some that could go up or down, but the rest of this is pretty accurate. So lastly, for the D tier Pokemon, again, just ignore the Gigantamax Pokemon down here. There's just two Pokemon that I feel like could move up. The first one is Galvantula. This Pokemon isn't great, but what you could use it for is you could put a Choice Scarf on it, and then you could give it Electro Web, Thunder Wave, Volt Switch, and Struggle Bug. So the reason that I give it Thunder Wave, even though it already has Electro Web, is because Electro Web does not work against Dragapult, because Dragapult has the ability Clear Body, so you can't lower its stats, but it still gets its speed cut in half if you paralyze it. And the other nice thing about Galvantula is that it gets Compound Eyes, which multiplies its accuracy of its moves by 1.3. So none of these moves are going to miss. Electro Web will always hit, Thunder Wave will always hit. So you know you're always going to be able to hit Dragapult with a Thunder Wave. In any other situation, you always know you're going to be able to hit Electro Web. So you could use it for that, similar to a Regieleki. The reason that I give it Choice Scarf is because that's the only way to make it faster than Dragapult. So even though that isn't ideal to use Choice Scarf Thunder Wave, because then you're locked into Thunder Wave, that's the best way to use it. So it's not great, that's why it's in the C tier, but it is something that you could consider using. The other Pokemon down here that I think could be moved up is Shiinotic, if that's how you pronounce it. So you could make an argument for B or C tier. I'm going to put it in the C tier because I don't love this thing, but some people might argue it's B tier. The reason it might be B tier is because it gets Spore, and Spore is just such a good move. It's 100% accurate, and it puts an opponent to sleep. The reason I don't love this Pokemon is because I feel like it's really easy to knock out. It's really slow, and there's plenty of good counters to it since it's Fairy and Grass, so you could hit it with a lot of different moves to knock it out. So it's weak to Fire, Ice, Flying, Steel, so I feel like there's plenty of things that can knock it out before it can get off a Spore. But since it does get access to that move, that's why I have it here. The reason it's not as good as something like a Mungus that also gets Spore is because it doesn't get Rage Powder, and its abilities aren't as good as a Mungus, so you can't use it in the same way that you would use in a Mungus. But it does get Spore, so it could be useful for that. Other than that, I think the rest of this list is pretty good. So those are just a few Pokemon that I wanted to talk about that I feel like were maybe a little bit better than I originally thought, or maybe a little bit worse than I originally thought. So again, feel free to let me know what you think. If you still think I got something in the wrong place, let me know in the comments. And again, like always, if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. It helps a lot. And, it makes me able to keep making these videos and keep this channel going. So I hope you like the video. Let me know what you think in the comments, and we'll see you for the next one.